when you were a kid, your house was robbed.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about that? I know that you said there was an
So
instance the first time that wasn't a full robbery because your mother was able to defend them off.
right,
And then there was a much worse incident after that.
correct. So I guess what was happening around that time was insecurity was becoming more, like I said, in the early 90s, right? There was a lot of like the uprisings and the civil unrest and things like that, and people started having ideas because they would get away with doing all kinds of things. So that basically meant that a lot of robberies started to take place. And so in my episode of Cold Night, I talk about that one time when, this was just before I started high school, where, people came over to the house. It was like, I don't know, like 2, 3 in the morning. This was going to be my first day in school. So I was super excited. And that's probably why I was up, or wasn't able to sleep so well that night. And I just heard like clanking noise, banging. I heard like a truck outside of our house. Next thing I know, I'm hearing like glasses shattering everywhere. They're breaking down the windows. They cut through. We had like bars, like the burglar bars, on the windows, and they're sawing through those. And my mom is like screaming, yelling, trying to get attention. My dad didn't live at the house at the time. My dad was on the road a lot when I was growing up. Like I said earlier, he's an engineer, and he was actually at the time building the telephone network in Nigeria. So he was one of the supervising engineers to build a telephone network. So he had to be, and he was an on-site supervisor. So he had to be in different parts of the country at the time. So he was rarely home. So he would show up in the summertime, spend a couple weeks, and then he's back on the road. And if he happens to be passing through Kaduna, he would stop by. So I didn't spend a lot of time with him. And so this was one of the times when he wasn't around, right? So they came in. The episode explains it in even more detail. But essentially, we were robbed. They broke into the house. We were lucky that they just made away with stuff, and we didn't get hurt, in the process. But it was a very, very traumatic experience. Just being in a situation where you're defenseless and you're not really able to do anything, you can't call the police. And I mean, because if you do call, they cut the phone wires, right? But even if we were able to call the police, like I didn't, it just didn't feel like there would have been anything that they would have been able to do. They did show up eventually, but it was too late.
Wasn't there a detail in there about the boots they were wearing?
Correct. And that was the other thing too, is some of the robberies were actually being perpetuated by forces. So it would be policemen, military folks. It's people who had access to weapons, right? That were committing a lot of those. They were either like handing out their guns to robbers or doing the robberies themselves. And prior to that incident, someone had come over to the house one day, was asking about my parents. Oh, your parents home? And my mom worked at the bank at the time. So she would be at work from like, I don't know, 7 a.m. till about 8 p.m. She was an assistant bank manager. So she would be at work pretty much all day. So when we got back from school, we would hang out on our own for a few hours before she got back. So this guy came over and, oh, yeah, yeah, is your parents home? He's looking around like, oh, so what? But I recognized what he was wearing.
Quick interruption. If you're enjoying this interview with LD, please consider subscribing, leaving a like, or posting a comment responding to something that you found interesting or completely disagreed with in the interview. I'm very open to that criticism. I love to be corrected, and I think that is a big point of this show. So please consider interacting, following, because we've got a lot more to come. All right, back to the interview.
And he had one of those like sweaters over his what appeared to be like a uniform, right? But then the boots is what I recognized because those were unique boots that only the military or the police would wear, at the time. And I did recognize that when those guys came in. So my conclusion, I don't have any proof other than that, was these were probably people who were kind of just looking around, surveying, trying to see what they could get, and then they came back and robbed us.
So why was this being done by police officers or military members? What does that say about the corruption at the time?
Well, corruption, corruption is a universal thing, but it's only possible where there's no enforcement, right? And if the guys who have weapons and are dealing with all kinds of civil unrest and uprisings get to kill people, get away, then they start to have ideas, right? Where it's like, hey, you know what? We're protecting all these people. We can go rob them ourselves, right? And what's going to happen? No one's going to investigate. It's just going to go down as, hey, something happened, and then we just kind of all just move on, right? So, I mean, I don't know what their motivations are except that they could do it and get away with it, right? So, and a lot of that was beginning to happen, at the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any kind of like countrywide? Maybe this isn't the case because of all the different tribes and groups that are trying to live together. But is there not like a shared code of morality of any kind?
Um,
Or if there was, is this just are these just bad actors?
these are just bad actors, I would say. And at the time, I mean, it's gotten worse over time, but at the time, it was just a few bad actors, right?
Okay.
And the fact that they were getting away with it is the reason why it pretty much just continued to grow, right? Because if you have a colleague that's out there, it's almost like having bad cops in the US, right? There may be a few cops here and there, sprinkles, right, who are in bed with, the drug dealers or the murderers and the whoever, right? And those guys getting away with it energizes everybody else. Like, oh, okay, so and so is doing this. He's building houses. He's buying cars. He's doing all this stuff outside of his 9 to 5. Let me go explore that as well, right? It was an option because there really wasn't any recourse. There wasn't any kind of punishment that came with it. So
Okay.
it
So this
just
was
became
more
okay.
bad actors at the time that grew, and I want to get to that later in the interview, like how Nigeria is today.
Right.
Um, but earlier you mentioned how you went into university,
Hmm.
and I think this kind of makes sense as a good progression from school, your upbringing. So this happened early high school, the incident with
Very first
being
day of high school, actually, the night of the
crazy.
morning, the morning of my first day in high school was when this happened. Yeah.
Okay, and then high school was pretty normal, I
Pretty
imagine.
normal, really cool. I mean, it's interesting when I look at the experience that my kids are having right now at their school. I mean, it's very similar. I mean, like I said, it was an American school, so pretty much everything that we did in school was similar to what you would experience at an American, middle school, high school.